We are following up tonight on that massive weapons seizure at a Los Angeles mansion. One man has been arrested.
Federal agents kicked down the door of a quiet home in Centralia, Washington, expecting a routine drug bust. They were wrong. What they found inside made them stop mid-step.
A Los Angeles man is under arrest after police found more than 1,000 rifles in his multi-million-dollar home yesterday.
This was not just cash or drugs. It was weapons. Rows of them. Assault rifles, heavy equipment, enough firepower to start a small war, hidden in a neighborhood where kids play outside. But the real shock came seconds later. This was not a stash. It was a full-scale production site, and it was tied to something that had been quietly operating across U.S. soil for years without detection. The raid that shook a quiet neighborhood. Homeland Security, the DEA, and local police had been watching that house in Centralia, Washington for months. Centralia is the kind of town where kids ride bikes without helmets and parents let them, because nothing crazy really happens there. The streets are wide and quiet. Neighbors know each other by name. Nothing about that neighborhood gave anything away. And that, investigators would later say, was exactly how it was designed to look.
You never know what goes on behind these gates. It's a lot of weapons.
The breach teams moved in before sunrise on October 28, 2025, in the kind of darkness where you feel it pressing against you. They were expecting a drug operation. They had prepared for resistance. What they had not prepared for was walking into something that looked less like a house and more like an armory. More than 1,000 firearms covered every surface, lined the walls, and spilled out onto the sidewalk. There were rifles, pistols, and assault-style weapons with high-capacity hardware that federal agents, people who have seen everything, described as built for sustained combat. One officer stood outside staring at the guns laid out along the pavement and said the only thing there was to say. You never know what goes on behind these gates. There are a lot of weapons. But the weapons were not even the thing that made agents go quiet. Inside that house, they found more than 90,000 fentanyl pills. Enough, one investigator noted, to kill every single person in a packed stadium and still have pills left over. They found roughly 25 kilograms of suspected fentanyl powder sitting in that same house. They found pill press equipment capable of producing thousands of pills every hour, running continuously, right there in a neighborhood where parents sent their children outside to play. They found over a pound of methamphetamine. They found another 1,000 fentanyl pills stored separately, as though the 90,000 were not already unfathomable. This was not a stash house. This was a factory. A weapons depot and a poison factory sitting side by side behind a gate on a quiet residential street, and not one person living nearby had any idea. That morning, 12 raids hit simultaneously across western Washington, from Linwood to Sammamish, all going in at the exact same moment. 10 people were arrested. Among them were 25-year-old Luis Humberto Llamos Guzman and 44-year-old Eduardo Villavencio Chelo. Neither of them were small players. These were central figures in a conspiracy that threaded narcotics, firearms, and organized crime across multiple counties. A third suspect, 30-year-old Jose Isabel Sandoval Zuniga, was stopped while driving like a man with nothing to hide. His car held 1.6 kilograms of fentanyl. His home held more drugs and a loaded .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. What nobody could answer yet was the question underneath all of it. The rifles recovered in Centralia matched weapon loadouts used by transnational criminal organizations crossing international borders. Investigators said openly that they did not yet know what this organization was actually building toward. They were asking whether the weapons were headed to gangs, whether any of this connected to something larger, whether the word terror belonged in the same sentence as what they had just found. None of it had answers yet. The operation was called Take Back America. Agents pulled $40,000 in cash from the property, which in cartel economics is essentially nothing. The weapons were the point. And as investigators began pulling threads, one of those threads ran all the way out of Washington state, across the entire country, straight into New York City, where one man had been feeding military-grade firearms into the streets for longer than anyone had known. the machine gun maker. One man, one pipeline, and a city at risk. David Morris was 31 years old when federal and city authorities arrested him on May 9, 2025. He was not nervous. He was not in a hurry. Morris moved the way people move when they have been doing something long enough that it no longer feels dangerous. And he had been doing this for nearly a decade, by his own account, which he shared openly with the people he was selling to, not knowing those people were undercover federal agents. The sting had been running for weeks. Investigators watched Morris sell 17 firearms to undercover officers at meetings near the Manhattan waterfront. Each one conducted like an ordinary handoff between people who trusted each other. But it was not what he sold them that made investigators lean forward. It was what he told them he could get. Morris said he had access to machine gun conversion kits, small devices street-level buyers call switches, which attach to a standard semi-automatic pistol and turn it into a fully automatic weapon capable of emptying an entire magazine in under 2 seconds. Morris was not offering a gun. He was offering the ability to turn any legal handgun into a battlefield weapon, quietly, cheaply, and fast. The guns Morris was moving came from Georgia, driven up the East Coast along a corridor that law enforcement has long called the Iron Pipeline, a route where firearms from states with looser purchasing laws travel north into states with stricter ones. Most operators on that pipeline move small quantities. Morris was moving volume. When investigators pulled the full thread of his operation, federal agents recovered more than 200 high-powered firearms connected to the broader case, including assault rifles, squad automatic weapons, and a .50 caliber machine gun, the kind of weapon designed to disable vehicles sitting inside a residential property in Georgia. They also found a loaded Tech-9 and more than $250,000 in cash hidden behind a wall in an attic, packed into orange Home Depot buckets with roughly $150,000 stuffed into each one. Morris was not only moving guns. On April 18th, he handed a sample of cocaine to one of the undercover officers, the kind of casual transaction that told investigators everything they needed to know about how diversified his operation had become. 14 other people were arrested in connection with the ring. 9 of them were in the country illegally, and the rest were United States citizens, which told investigators something important. This was not purely a foreign operation or purely a domestic one. It had roots in both. And that combination made it significantly harder to track and significantly harder to stop. Morris now faces charges of unlicensed dealing of firearms, firearms trafficking, and using a firearm in furtherance of drug trafficking. That last charge carries a mandatory minimum of 5 years in federal prison and has a ceiling of life. Morris was one pipeline, but while the FBI was dismantling the Georgia to New York route, investigators at the southern border were standing in front of something that made Morris look like a footnote. The father and son smugglers, a family business built on betrayal. Laredo, Texas sits on one of the busiest land ports of entry in the world. Thousands of commercial vehicles pass through that crossing every single day, and the overwhelming majority of them are exactly what they appear to be. Legitimate cargo, legitimate paperwork, legitimate drivers. The sheer volume is the shield. Just hide something inside enough ordinary things and it stops being visible. Alar Ramirez Cortez and his son Edgar Ramirez Diaz understood that better than most because they had built their entire operation around it. Cortez was 41 years old and a lawful permanent resident of the United States. His son Edgar was a United States citizen. On paper, they were as legitimate as the trucks they were driving. That was not a coincidence. Federal analysts would later note that recruiting people with legal status to move contraband across the border is a deliberate cartel strategy, one designed specifically to reduce the friction at inspection points where a foreign national might draw a second look. A legal resident and his citizen son driving an old truck. Nobody flags that combination. Nobody is supposed to. But something flagged. Whether it was a scanner anomaly or an agent's instinct, the 2 tractor trailers were pulled for secondary inspection. The paperwork was clean, the drivers were calm, there was nothing obvious to point at. So agents started looking closer, and when they started tapping on the interior walls of the trailers, the walls sounded exactly like solid wood. But that was the problem. Walls inside a commercial trailer should not sound like that. When agents finally pried the compartments open, they found nearly 400 firearms stacked inside, along with thousands of rounds of ammunition. The hidden spaces had been architecturally engineered into the frame of the trailers themselves. Not bolted on or improvised, but built in with enough precision that the modification was essentially invisible to anyone not looking for it specifically. This was not the work of someone with a drill. This required time, money, specialized knowledge, and access to the kind of fabrication equipment that does not come cheap. Federal investigators noted it plainly. This was corporate-level logistics applied to criminal enterprise, and whoever designed those compartments had done it before. Intelligence quickly linked the shipment to Mexican cartel supply routes, which pointed investigators toward a question they pursued hard. Who sold 400 guns to these two men? The answer came back to legal gun shop purchases made across the United States, passed through straw buyers one or two at a time. The father and son detail is the one that stays with you. This was not a faceless organization sending anonymous couriers. This was a family that looked at their legal status, their clean records, and their ability to move freely across the border, and chose to use all of it in service of an arms pipeline feeding cartel violence. And the question that investigators could not stop asking was the one nobody could fully answer. How many other drivers, with the same clean paperwork and the same legal standing, were doing the exact same thing at that very moment? To answer such a riddle, federal agents had no choice but to declare war on the cartels. Operation Take Back America. The DEA declares war on CJNG. The DEA did not announce it was coming. It rarely does when the target is the most dangerous criminal organization operating on American soil. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known internationally as CJNG, is not a street gang that grew too large for its neighborhood. Federal authorities describe it as the most powerful and most aggressive cartel currently operating in Mexico, and that description does not fully capture what it has become. CJNG runs drug trafficking operations across multiple continents. It has expanded into stealing crude oil directly from Pemex, Mexico's state-owned petroleum company, siphoning billions in energy revenue through coordinated pipeline taps and inside corruption. It operates alongside the Gulf Cartel in diversified criminal enterprises that span every high-profit category of organized crime. It has military-grade weapons, logistics infrastructure, financial officers, and enforcers who operate with the kind of discipline and coordination that intelligence analysts typically associate with armed state actors, not criminal networks. In late 2025, the United States government designated CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization, a classification that matters enormously because it stops treating the cartel as a law enforcement problem and starts treating it as a national security one, opening the door to counterterrorism statutes, global asset freezing, and methods of pursuing cartel leadership that standard drug trafficking laws do not allow. Then, the DEA moved. In late September of 2025, the agency launched a nationwide offensive against CJNG and its connected networks. The operation ran for 5 days. In those 5 days, 670 people were arrested across the country. Agents seized 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, more than 1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, over 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, and 244 firearms. Those numbers are difficult to hold in your head all at once, which is part of what makes them so disturbing. 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine is not a supply. It is an infrastructure. It represents a production and distribution system so deeply embedded in American communities that dismantling even a portion of it required a 5-day coordinated federal offensive touching nearly every region of the country. The raids on western Washington, the 12 simultaneous strikes that tore open that house in Centralia, were part of this same operation. SWAT teams from Seattle and Snohomish County moved alongside Washington State Patrol's specialized units, while IRS investigators followed the money in real time, tracing financial threads and freezing assets before they could be moved or hidden. Every agency present understood they were not just arresting individuals. They were dismantling nodes in a network that would attempt to rebuild the moment the pressure eased. That is the part of this that does not resolve cleanly. 670 arrests is a staggering number. The seizures represent genuine damage to CJNG's operational capacity. But the cartel did not build its infrastructure overnight, and it does not lose it overnight either. CJNG has confirmed weapons stockpiles sitting inside American neighborhoods, some ready for immediate use, others staged for southbound shipment to fuel ongoing violence in Mexico. It has supply chains and financial systems and recruits who are already in place. The Foreign Terrorist Organization designation is the United States government finally calling this what it has always been. Not a drug problem, not a border problem, but a terrorism problem that has been operating inside American cities for years. And while federal agents were processing 670 arrests above ground, the cartel had already been building something else entirely, something no one expected to find, running silently underneath the Arizona desert. The Underground Highway, a cartel subway system beneath American soil. In late June of 2025, authorities near Yuma, Arizona discovered a tunnel running beneath the border between Mexico and the United States. That sentence does not prepare you for what the tunnel actually was. Border agents and investigators have found illegal tunnels before. Narrow dirt passages barely wide enough for a person to crawl through on their stomach, dug by hand, held together with luck and wooden planks, the kind of hole that collapses if someone sneezes wrong. What they found near Yuma was none of that. The tunnel stretched nearly 2,900 feet from end to end, which is more than half a mile of engineered underground passage running 50 feet below the surface of the Earth. It started on the Mexico side and terminated inside a residential neighborhood in San Luis, on the American side, meaning it had an exit point sitting quietly in a community where people lived and moved and went about their days with no idea what was directly beneath their feet. The walls were reinforced steel. A ventilation system ran the full length of the tunnel, pumping fresh air through the passage continuously. High-voltage lighting illuminated the entire corridor from one end to the other. And then there was the rail system, a custom-built track running the length of the tunnel, purpose-built to shuttle cargo back and forth efficiently without anyone needing to carry it by hand. They built a subway. That is what it was. A private underground railway connecting two countries, engineered and constructed in complete secrecy, beneath the detection range of every sensor and drone and patrol that U.S. Customs and Border Protection had deployed above it. Consider what that actually required. The planning alone would have taken months. The construction required heavy equipment, specialized materials, engineering knowledge, and a workforce large enough to excavate and reinforce half a mile of underground corridor without drawing attention on either side of the border. The ventilation system and electrical infrastructure required technical expertise that does not come from amateur labor. The rail system required fabrication and installation. Intelligence analysts placed the capital investment for a structure like this in the multi-million-dollar range, and that estimate is almost certainly conservative. This was not an improvised smuggling route. This was a permanent piece of criminal infrastructure, built to last and built to move volume. The tunnel was not only moving drugs north. Investigators believe it was also used to push weapons south, feeding firearms into cartel hands in Mexico through a corridor that law enforcement did not know existed until they were standing inside it. Drugs going one direction, guns going the other, through a passage that had a rail system and lights and fresh air and steel walls, hidden 50 feet underground in a neighborhood where nobody suspected a thing. The tunnel was a marvel of criminal engineering. But it was also a symptom of something much larger and much more disturbing. Because when you step back and connect every raid, every seizure, and every arrest, from Centralia to Manhattan to Laredo to the Arizona desert, a single terrifying picture comes into focus. The cartels are not at the border anymore. They are inside the border. And the weapons they are stockpiling in American neighborhoods aren't just for protection. They are part of a two-way weapons economy that is fueling war on both sides of the line. The Iron Pipeline. How American guns become cartel weapons. Every gun recovered in every raid described in this story started its life the same way. Someone walked into a licensed gun shop somewhere in America, showed a valid ID, filled out the required paperwork, passed a background check, and bought it legally. That is where the trail begins. What happens next is the part that keeps federal investigators awake. The mechanism is called straw purchasing, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Cartel networks identify and recruit individuals with clean records and legal status, and those individuals walk into licensed dealers and buy firearms on behalf of the network. One gun at a time, spread across multiple shops in multiple states over multiple weeks, with each individual transaction completely legal, collectively feed an arsenal that ends up in places like that house in Centralia or those engineered compartments in the Laredo tractor trailers. The 400 firearms intercepted at the Laredo crossing were traced back to legal purchases at American gun shops across several states. The cartels did not steal those weapons. They bought them, methodically and patiently, through a gray market that the law has never fully closed. Once the guns move south, they do not stay as purchased for long. Cartel enforcers modify and upgrade them. Then they deploy them to protect operations, intimidate rivals, and fight government forces in Mexico. The machine gun conversion kits that David Morris was offering in Manhattan represent the same logic applied domestically. A legal handgun bought at a licensed dealer, fitted with a switch that costs almost nothing, becomes a fully automatic weapon capable of emptying a magazine in under 2 seconds. The cartels are not just moving guns through the pipeline, they are upgrading them at both ends of it. The funding cycle that drives all of this is straightforward and self-sustaining in a way that makes it genuinely difficult to break. Methamphetamine and fentanyl move north and generate profit. That profit is used to purchase American firearms through straw buyers. Those firearms cross south and protect the supply chain, enforce cartel territory, and eliminate competition. More drugs are produced and more money is made, then more guns are purchased, and the loop continues without interruption. The weapons stockpile found in Centralia represented one end of that cycle. The tunnel discovered beneath the Arizona desert represented the corridor that connects the two ends. And the arrests in between, Morris in Manhattan, the Ramirez father and son in Laredo, the 10 people taken down across western Washington, represented individual nodes in a network that does not stop functioning because individual nodes are removed. The pipeline is real, the tunnels are real, the stash houses are real. And they are not on the border, they are in your city, your suburb, possibly your neighborhood. But the most unsettling truth hasn't been addressed yet. For every operation like Take Back America, for every Morris arrest, for every tunnel discovered, the cartels are already rebuilding. The real question isn't whether law enforcement can win individual battles. It's whether anyone is winning the war. And the answer, based on what investigators found in that final, most disturbing discovery, may chill you to the bone. The invisible war. Are we winning or just catching the decoys? At some point in the middle of all of this, a federal investigator said something that has not been answered yet. They were standing in the aftermath of the Centralia raid, looking at more than 1,000 firearms laid out across a sidewalk, when they said they were still trying to figure out exactly what this person or this organization was doing with the weapons. They said they did not know if the guns were going to gangs, if any of it was terror-related, or if something larger was being prepared. They said they were not certain. That uncertainty coming from a seasoned federal agent standing inside what was effectively a weapons factory embedded in a residential street, is the most honest and most disturbing thing anyone said across this entire investigation. Because here is what the evidence across all of these cases actually shows when you lay it flat and look at it without flinching. The cartels operating inside the United States are not criminal gangs that got too big. They are organizations with supply chains that rival legitimate corporations, with logistics managers coordinating multi-state and cross-border operations, with financial officers laundering money through real estate and cash and cryptocurrency, with engineers capable of constructing a half-mile tunnel 50 feet underground, complete with reinforced steel walls, a ventilation system, electrical infrastructure, and a custom-built rail system. They have recruiters who specifically identify legal residents and United States citizens to serve as frontline operatives because those individuals draw no flags at border crossings or gun counters. They have enforcers armed with American firearms, some of them converted to fully automatic weapons for a few dollars and one small piece of metal. This is not a law enforcement problem that got out of hand. This is a parallel institutional structure operating inside American borders, and it has been building quietly for longer than most people are comfortable acknowledging. The Foreign Terrorist Organization designation applied to CJNG is the United States government finally reaching for tools it previously reserved for groups like Al-Qaeda. And that tells you something important about how seriously federal analysts are now treating the threat. Counterterrorism statutes, global asset freezing, military intelligence coordination. All of it are now legally available against cartel leadership. That is a meaningful shift. It is also, on its own, not enough. For every tunnel discovered, analysts believe several more are operating undetected. For every stash house raided, another is already being stocked in another quiet neighborhood where parents let their children play outside. For every pipeline node arrested, the network identifies an alternate route and keeps moving. The weapons found in Washington and New York and Laredo and Arizona were not endpoints. They were stops in a continuous flow of firearms moving through American communities, funded by American drug demand, purchased through American legal systems, and invisible to every person living next door to them. The cartels are not approaching the border. They are already past it, already embedded, already operating. The door that got kicked in belonged to someone's neighbor. The only question that remains is which door is next